Jake Morrison floated through the metal doorway into the biggest training room he had ever seen. The walls curved away in every direction, forming a perfect sphere that seemed to go on forever. Tiny lights dotted the dark surfaces like stars, and the air hummed with the sound of machines keeping everything working. This was Section 7 of the Galactic Defense Academy, the place where warriors from across the galaxy came to learn how to fight in space. Jake had dreamed of this moment for months, but now that he was here, he felt small and nervous. The room was full of aliens. Not just a few, but dozens of different species, all floating around and talking in languages that made strange clicking, humming, and whistling sounds. Jake's translator device worked hard to turn their words into English, but sometimes it just gave up and beeped quietly. Near the center of the room, a group of tall, graceful beings moved through the air like dancers. They had 4 arms each, and their skin was pale blue with silver patterns that seemed to shift and change. These were the Altarians, and Jake had read about them in his training manuals. They came from a world with very low gravity, so moving in zero gravity was as natural to them as walking was to humans on the other side of the room. Creatures that looked like they were made of living crystal floated in perfect formations. Their bodies caught the light and threw it back in rainbow patterns. These were the Zephyrians, and they could control electricity and magnetic fields with their minds. Jake watched as one of them made a small ball of lightning dance between its fingers, but the most impressive group was the Corvans. They looked like giant insects, but Jake knew better than to think they were weak. Each Corvan had 6 arms and legs, and their bodies were covered in natural armor that looked like black metal. They were bigger than humans, stronger than humans, and they had been fighting in space for thousands of years. Jake felt a tap on his shoulder and turned to see Amy Collins floating beside him. She was his training partner, and they had traveled here together from Earth. Amy was smart and brave, but right now she looked as worried as Jake felt. "Look at them all," Amy whispered, watching an Altarian warrior spin through the air while striking at targets with all 4 arms. "We're going to get destroyed out there." Jake nodded but tried to stay positive. "We knew this would be hard. Humans have only been in space for a few hundred years. These species have been doing this for thousands." A loud sound echoed through the room, and all the aliens stopped talking. A figure floated toward them from the far side of the sphere. It was an Altarian, but older than the others, with silver patterns that seemed more complex and moved more slowly across its skin. "Welcome, warriors of the galaxy," the figure said, and Jake's translator turned the musical sounds into clear English. "I am Instructor Vexhai. You are here to learn the art of combat in the void of space, where there is no up or down, no ground beneath your feet, and no air to breathe." The instructor's 4 arms moved as he spoke, pointing to different parts of the room. "In space, only the strong survive. Only those who can adapt to the emptiness between the stars. Today, we will see what each species brings to the battlefield." Jake felt his stomach drop. He had hoped they would have more time to practice before being tested. "Altarians," Vexhai called out, "show us your natural gifts." The blue-skinned warriors moved into the center of the room. Jake watched in amazement. As they began to fight in pairs, their 4 arms moving so fast they looked like blurs. They spun and twisted through the air, striking and blocking and grabbing with perfect coordination. Their movements were beautiful and deadly at the same time. "Thousands of years of evolution in low gravity," Vexhai explained as his people demonstrated. 4 arms allow for simultaneous attack and defense, superior spatial awareness, natural advantages in 3-dimensional combat. When the Altarians finished, the Zephyrians took their turn. They didn't move as much as the Altarians, but they didn't need to. Jake watched as one of them created a shield of crackling energy around itself while another shot bolts of lightning at targets across the room. The crystal beings could attack from a distance while protecting themselves with force fields. "Electromagnetic manipulation," Vexhai noted. "They can create barriers, disable enemy equipment, and attack without physical contact. Very effective." In the vacuum of space, then came the Corvans. The insect-like warriors formed groups and moved together like a single organism. Their 6 limbs worked together perfectly, some holding weapons, others grabbing opponents, and still others defending against attacks. They were like living tanks, covered in armor and bristling with weapons. Natural armor plating, the instructor said. Multiple limbs for complex maneuvers. Pack hunting instincts, born warriors. Other species took their turns. Fish-like beings who could move through the air as easily as water. Creatures with tentacles that could stretch across the room to grab opponents. Beings made of what looked like living metal who could change their shape at will. Each demonstration was more impressive than the last. Jake began to understand why humans were considered one of the weakest species in space combat. They had only 2 arms, no natural armor, no special powers, and no instincts for 3-dimensional fighting. Humans, Vexai called out, and Jake felt everyone's eyes turned toward him and Amy. Please demonstrate your species' combat abilities. Jake and Amy moved to the center of the room. They had trained for this moment, but their Earth-based martial arts looked clumsy and slow compared to what they had just seen. Jake threw a punch that would have been fast on Earth, but in zero gravity, it just made him spin backward. Amy tried to kick, but without gravity to anchor her, she just pushed herself away from her target. They tried techniques from boxing, karate, and wrestling, but everything that worked on Earth failed in space. Their movements were awkward, their strikes had no power, and they couldn't control their direction after attacking. The other species watched in what Jake was sure was amusement. Some of the aliens made sounds that the translator couldn't turn into words, but Jake suspected they were laughing. After a few minutes that felt like hours, Vexai signaled for them to stop. Humans, he said, and his voice sounded almost kind. Your species shows courage and determination. However, your physical limitations in zero-gravity combat are ... significant. Jake felt his face burn with embarrassment. He had trained his whole life for this moment, and he was failing in front of the entire galaxy. Perhaps, Vexai continued, humans would be better suited for support roles. Ship operations, communications, logistics. Not every species is meant for frontline combat. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Support roles. That was a polite way of saying they weren't good enough to fight alongside the real warriors. As the training session ended and the aliens began to drift toward the exits, Jake floated in the center of the room, staring at the targets he had failed to hit. Amy came up beside him, her face showing the same disappointment he felt. Maybe he's right, Amy said quietly. Maybe we should focus on what we're good at. Jake watched the last of the Corvin warriors leave the room, their 6 limbs moving with perfect coordination. I don't know what we're good at anymore, he admitted, but as he floated there in the empty training room, surrounded by the targets he couldn't hit and the obstacles he couldn't overcome, something deep inside Jake refused to give up. There had to be a way. Humans hadn't survived on Earth for thousands of years. Just to quit when things got difficult. He thought about the demonstrations he had watched. All the aliens were impressive, but they all followed patterns. The Altarians always led with their dominant right arms. The Zephyrians stayed in one place when they used their powers. The Corvins moved in rigid formations. Maybe there was something there. Maybe the answer wasn't to fight like the aliens, but to fight like humans. He just had to figure out what that meant. Come on, Jake said to Amy, pushing off toward the exit. We have work to do. As they left Section 7, Jake made a promise to himself. He would find a way to make humans competitive in space combat. He didn't know how yet, but he would figure it out. The galaxy was about to learn that humans were full of surprises. Jake Morrison woke up in his small sleeping pod feeling tired and frustrated. The night had been filled with dreams of spinning aliens and failed attacks. He had replayed yesterday's embarrassing training session over and over in his mind, trying to figure out what went wrong. The Academy's artificial morning light slowly brightened in his room, and Jake could hear the sounds of other trainees moving around in the corridors outside. He knew that today would bring more training, more demonstrations of alien superiority, and more proof that humans didn't belong in space combat. Amy Collins was already awake when Jake found her in the dining hall. She sat alone at a table, picking at a bowl of what the Academy called food, but tasted like nothing Jake had ever eaten on Earth. Her usual cheerful expression was replaced by a look of deep thought. "Sleep well?" Jake asked as he sat down with his own bowl of mystery food. "Not really," Amy replied. "I keep thinking about what Instructor Vexhai said. Maybe we should consider those support roles. Communications, logistics, ship operations, those are important jobs too." Jake stirred his food and frowned. Important, yes. But not what we trained for, not what we came here to do. Before Amy could respond, a loud announcement echoed through the dining hall. All trainees were to report to the advanced training sections immediately. Today would focus on complex combat scenarios and tactical formations. Jake and Amy made their way to Section 7 along with hundreds of other beings. The training room looked the same as yesterday, but now it was filled with holographic obstacles and targets that moved through the air in random patterns. This was going to be much harder than the basic demonstrations. Instructor Vexhai floated in the center of the room, his forearms moving in precise gestures as he explained the day's exercises. Today you will face moving targets and changing environments. Combat in space is never predictable. You must adapt quickly or you will not survive. The Altarians went first again, and Jake watched them with growing amazement. They moved through the obstacle course like they were born for it, their forearms working independently to grab handholds, strike targets, and defend against attacks. They spun and twisted through the air with perfect control, never seeming to get dizzy or confused. The Zephyrians created electromagnetic shields that pushed obstacles aside while they glided through the course. Their crystal bodies caught the light from their own electrical attacks, turning them into living prisms of deadly beauty. The Corvans worked in teams, their 6 limbs allowing them to form complex formations that could attack and defend simultaneously. They moved like a single organism, each warrior knowing exactly where the others would be at any moment. Jake noticed something as he watched the different species. They were all very good at what they did, but they also did the same things every time. The Altarians always spun to the right first. The Zephyrians always created their shields in the same pattern. The Corvans always formed the same basic shapes. "Your turn, humans," Vexhai called out. Jake and Amy entered the obstacle course, but it was even worse than yesterday. The moving targets were too fast. The obstacles changed direction without warning, and everything seemed designed to confuse beings who were used to fighting with their feet on the ground. Jake tried to punch a target, but his movement in zero gravity sent him spinning out of control. Amy attempted to kick, but she missed completely and crashed into a barrier. They stumbled and spun and failed their way through the course while the other species watched in silence. When they finally finished, Jake felt like his failure was complete. He had not hit a single target, avoided any obstacles, or shown any skill whatsoever. Amy looked equally defeated. "Humans," Vexhai said, his voice gentle but firm. "Perhaps it would be better if you observed today rather than participated. You can learn much from watching others." The words stung, but Jake nodded and moved to the observation area. However, instead of feeling sorry for himself, he decided to really watch what the other species were doing. He studied their movements, their strategies, their strengths and weaknesses. That's when he began to notice something interesting. All the alien species were very good at using their natural advantages, but they were also limited by them. The Altarians with their forearms had to coordinate complex movements, which made them slower to change direction. The Zephyrians had to stay relatively still to use their electrical powers effectively. The Corvans moved in predictable patterns, because their pack instincts made them think as a group. During a break, Jake approached Dr. Lisa Park, the human scientist who worked with the Academy. She was studying data about the different species' performance and didn't look up when Jake floated over to her workstation. "Dr. Park," Jake said, "can I ask you something about physics?" She looked up from her screens, surprised to see the human trainee who had performed so poorly. "Of course, Jake. What do you need to know?" "In zero gravity, what happens when you spin?" Dr. Park brought up a holographic display showing a rotating object. Once you start spinning in zero gravity, you keep spinning until something stops you. It's called conservation of angular momentum. The faster you spin, the harder it is to stop. What if you change your body position while spinning? Interesting question. Dr. Park manipulated the hologram, showing a figure pulling its arms in and out. If you pull your arms in, you spin faster. If you extend them, you spin slower. Figure skaters on Earth use this principle all the time. Jake stared at the display, his mind racing. Figure skaters. They control their spin by changing their body position. Exactly. Humans are actually very good at controlling rotation because of our body structure and inner ear design. We've been doing it for thousands of years in sports and activities. Jake felt excitement building in his chest. Dr. Park, can you show me more about human rotational control? For the next hour, Dr. Park explained how humans had developed natural abilities for spinning and rotating. Dancers, gymnasts, figure skaters, and even children playing had all learned to control their rotation. The human body was actually designed to handle spinning better than most species. The key is our mass distribution, Dr. Park explained. We're relatively compact compared to species with multiple limbs. We can change our rotational speed quickly and maintain balance while spinning. Jake watched videos of Earth athletes spinning, jumping, and rotating with perfect control. These were skills that humans had been practicing for generations, but no one had ever thought to apply them to space combat. Dr. Park, Jake said slowly, what if our supposed weakness is actually a strength we haven't discovered yet? That afternoon, Jake asked for permission to use an empty training room. He told Amy about his conversation with Dr. Park, and together, they began to experiment with rotation in zero gravity. Jake pushed off from a wall and pulled his arms tight against his body. Just like Dr. Park had shown him, he began to spin faster. Then he extended his arms and slowed down. He could control his rotation speed just by changing his body position. This is incredible, Amy said, trying the technique herself. I can spin as fast or slow as I want. Jake began to add strikes to his rotation. Instead of trying to punch while standing still, he spun and extended his arm at just the right moment to hit a target. The spinning motion actually made his strikes more powerful because it added rotational force to his punch. Amy, try this, Jake said, demonstrating how to strike multiple targets during a single spin. Use the rotation to your advantage. Amy experimented with the technique, discovering that she could hit targets that would have been impossible to reach with normal Earth-based fighting. The spinning motion let her attack from unexpected angles and directions. They practiced for hours, learning to control their spins, coordinate their strikes, and use their rotation to avoid attacks. Jake found that once he started spinning, he could change direction quickly by shifting his body position, something that the multi-limbed aliens couldn't do easily. Jake, Amy said as they took a break, I think we might be onto something here. Jake nodded, watching a group of Altarians practice their complex four-arm techniques in the next room. They're all fighting the way their bodies were designed to fight. But maybe we've been trying to fight like them instead of fighting like humans. So what do humans do better than anyone else? Jake thought about the figure skaters, gymnasts, and dancers Dr. Park had shown him. We spin. We've been spinning and rotating for thousands of years. Maybe it's time to turn that into a weapon. As they left the training room, Jake felt hopeful for the first time since arriving at the academy. Tomorrow he would test his theory in real combat. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had been practicing the perfect zero-gravity combat technique for their entire history without even knowing it. Jake Morrison woke up early the next morning with butterflies in his stomach. Today was the day he would test his spinning technique in real combat. He had spent the evening practicing his rotational control, and he felt more confident than he had since arriving at the academy. But confidence was one thing, and actual combat was another. Amy Collins met him in the corridor outside their quarters. She looked nervous but determined. Ready for this? She asked. As ready as I'll ever be, Jake replied, checking his combat suit one more time. He had made small adjustments to his maneuvering thrusters, setting them to provide just enough push to start his spins without interfering with his rotational momentum. The main arena was much bigger than the training rooms they had been using. It was a perfect sphere, nearly 100 meters across, with observation windows all around the outside. Jake could see aliens from dozens of different species watching from the viewing areas. Word had spread that the humans were going to participate. In combat trials today, instructor Vexhai floated in the center of the arena with several other Academy instructors. His forearms moved in precise patterns as he explained the day's exercises. Today we will conduct actual combat trials. Each participant will face opponents from different species. This is not practice, this is real combat simulation. Jake felt his mouth go dry. Real combat simulation meant that mistakes could result in serious injury. The weapons were set to training levels, but they could still cause pain and damage. "Human Morrison," Vexhai called out, "you will face Caxthul of the Corvan Defense Force." Jake's heart sank. Caxthul was the most skilled warrior in the Academy's current training cycle. The Corvan had defeated every opponent he had faced, usually within minutes. He was nearly twice Jake's size, covered in natural armor, and had 6 limbs that could all attack independently. Caxthul moved to the center of the arena with confidence. His black, insect-like body gleamed under the arena lights, and his 6 arms held various weapons. He had been training for space combat since he was young, and he had never lost a match at the Academy. The alien spectators pressed closer to the observation windows. Most of them expected this to be a very short fight. Humans were considered one of the weakest species in space combat, and Caxthul was one of the strongest warriors they had ever seen. Combat begins in 30 seconds. Vexhai announced, "Remember, this is training, but it is real. Fight with honor." Jake positioned himself at one side of the arena, trying to calm his nerves. He had practiced his spinning technique for hours, but he had never used it against a real opponent. Caxthul looked huge and dangerous, and Jake suddenly wondered if his idea was completely crazy. "Begin." Vexhai's voice echoed through the arena. Caxthul immediately launched into his proven strategy. He used 4 of his arms to create a defensive barrier around himself while striking with the other 2. His movements were fast and precise, designed to overwhelm opponents with the sheer number of attacks they had to defend against. Jake took a deep breath and pushed off from the arena wall. Instead of approaching in a straight line like every other opponent Caxthul had faced, Jake pulled his arms tight against his body and began to spin. His rotation accelerated quickly, and he found himself moving toward the Corvan in a tight spiral. The spinning motion made Jake's approach unpredictable. Caxthul had prepared for opponents who came at him directly, but Jake's rotating flight path confused the Corvan's defensive calculations. The 6-limbed warrior tried to track Jake's movement, but the human spinning made it difficult to predict where he would be from one moment to the next. As Jake closed the distance, he extended his right arm at precisely the right moment in his rotation. His spinning motion added power to his strike, and he hit Caxthul in the side before the Corvan could adjust his defense. The impact sent vibrations through Jake's arm, but he had actually landed a solid hit. The arena fell completely silent. No one in the current training cycle had successfully struck Caxthul. The Corvan warrior was considered nearly untouchable. Jake used his rotational momentum to change direction, something he had practiced extensively the day before. By shifting his body position during his spin, he could alter his flight path in ways that would have been impossible with normal movement. Caxthul recovered quickly from his surprise and attempted to trap Jake in a defensive formation. The Corvan's 6 limbs moved to create a cage-like barrier that should have been impossible to penetrate. But Jake's spinning approach allowed him to come from above, slipping through an opening that existed for only a split second. Jake extended both arms in sequence during his rotation, landing 2 quick strikes before spinning away from Caxthul's counterattack. The Corvan's multiple limbs, so effective against stationary opponents, couldn't track Jake's rapidly changing position and orientation. The alien spectators began to murmur among themselves. What they were watching had never happened before. A human was not just surviving against Caxthul, but actually winning. Caxthul adapted his strategy. Trying to use his superior size and strength to overwhelm Jake, the Corvan extended all 6 limbs, creating a wide net of attacks that should have been impossible to avoid. But Jake's spinning technique let him approach from angles that Caxthul couldn't effectively defend. Jake spun up and over Caxthul's extended limbs, striking the Corvan's back before the warrior could turn around. Then he changed his rotation axis, approaching from the side to land another hit. Each strike was brief but precise, delivered during the optimal moment of Jake's spin. The Corvan warrior was becoming frustrated. His proven techniques, which had defeated every opponent he had ever faced, were useless against Jake's unpredictable spinning attacks. Caxthul began to overextend his limbs, trying desperately to hit the spinning human. Jake recognized the opportunity immediately. When Caxthul overextended his left arms, Jake spun in close and delivered a series of rapid strikes to the Corvan's exposed side. The armor plating that usually protected Caxthul couldn't help him when Jake attacked from angles the armor wasn't designed to cover. The match continued for several more minutes, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Jake had found a way to neutralize all of Caxthul's advantages. The Corvan's multiple limbs became a liability when he couldn't predict where Jake would attack from. His superior size and strength meant nothing when he couldn't hit his target. Jake's final move was spectacular. He spun in a tight spiral directly at Caxthul, then suddenly changed his rotation axis at the last second. Instead of hitting where the Corvan expected, Jake struck from below, delivering a blow that would have been decisive in actual combat. "Combat concluded," Vexhai announced, his voice carrying a note of amazement. Human Morrison demonstrates victory. The arena remained silent for several long seconds. Then, slowly, the alien spectators began to make sounds of approval. It was the first time anyone had seen a human defeat one of the Academy's top warriors. Jake floated in the center of the arena, breathing hard but feeling incredible. He had done it. He had proven that humans could compete in space combat. His spinning technique had actually worked in real combat against a skilled opponent. Caxthul approached Jake, his 6 arms moving in what Jake's translator indicated was a gesture of respect. "Human Morrison," the Corvan said, "your fighting technique is unlike anything I have encountered. How do you maintain control while spinning at such speeds?" "Practice," Jake replied, still catching his breath. "Lots of practice." Amy Collins rushed over from the observation area, her face glowing with excitement. "Jake, that was incredible. You actually beat him?" More aliens began to approach, all asking questions about the spinning technique. Representatives from different species wanted to know how Jake had developed such an effective fighting style. Instructor Vexhai floated over his forearms, moving in patterns that Jake was learning to recognize as deep thought. "Human Morrison," he said, "your technique appears to violate conventional combat principles, yet it was clearly effective. How is this possible?" Jake looked around at all the aliens who were watching him with new respect. Yesterday they had considered humans to be weaklings who belonged in support roles. Today they were asking him to teach them how to fight. "Maybe," Jake said slowly, "humans have been preparing for space combat longer than anyone realized. We just didn't know it yet." As the crowd of aliens continued to grow around him, Jake felt a deep satisfaction. He had proven that being different didn't mean being weak. Sometimes the things that made you different were exactly what made you strong. The news of Jake Morrison's victory over Caxthul spread through the Galactic Defense Academy faster than light itself. Within hours, aliens from every species at the Academy were requesting demonstrations of the human spinning technique. The training facilities that had been nearly empty when humans practiced were now packed with curious observers. Jake found himself at the center of attention wherever he went. Aliens who had barely acknowledged his existence 3 days ago now stopped him in corridors to ask questions. The Altarian combat instructors wanted to understand how he maintained spatial awareness while rotating. The Zephyrian electromagnetic specialists were puzzled by how the spinning motion disrupted their targeting systems. Amy Collins had her own crowd of admirers after successfully demonstrating the technique against a Zephyrian opponent that afternoon. Her spinning approach had made the aliens' electromagnetic barriers completely useless, as the energy shields couldn't adapt fast enough to her changing position. "This is crazy," Amy said as she and Jake found a quiet corner of the Academy's central hub. "Yesterday we were failures, and today everyone wants to learn from us." Jake nodded, still feeling overwhelmed by the sudden attention. Dr. Park was right about human physiology being suited for rotation, but I never expected it to work this well. Commander Zolkith of the Altarian Defense Force approached their table, the tall four-armed being moved with the grace typical of his species, but there was something different in his posture. Instead of the casual superiority Jake had seen from Altarians before, Zolkith seemed genuinely curious and respectful. "Human Morrison," Zolkith said, his translator rendering his musical language into clear English. "May I join you? I have questions about your combat technique." Jake gestured to an empty seat. "Of course, Commander." Zolkith settled into the chair, his forearms folding in a complex pattern. "Your spinning method appears to violate basic combat physics. How do you maintain accuracy while rotating? How do you avoid becoming disoriented?" "Human bodies are designed for it," Jake explained. "We've been practicing rotational control for thousands of years through sports and dance. Our inner ear gives us natural balance during spins." "Fascinating," Zolkith said. "Our species developed 4 arms to give us advantages in combat, but those same arms make controlled spinning very difficult. The neural coordination required to manage 4 limbs during rotation is extremely complex." Amy leaned forward. "That's what makes our technique work. You're all so good at using your natural advantages that you've become predictable. We're doing something completely different." Other aliens began to gather around their table. A Zephyrian electromagnetic specialist named Vorthan joined the conversation, his crystal body refracting light in rainbow patterns. "The spinning disrupts our targeting calculations," Vorthan admitted. "Our electromagnetic attacks require precise positioning. When you rotate, we cannot maintain accurate aim long enough to strike effectively." Jake was beginning to understand the full implications of what he had discovered. Every species here has developed combat techniques based on their natural abilities. But those same abilities create limitations you might not realize. Dr. Lisa Park appeared at Jake's shoulder, carrying a tablet full of data. "I've been analyzing combat footage from today's demonstrations," she said excitedly. "The efficiency ratings are incredible. Humans using the spinning technique are succeeding against opponents who should theoretically be superior." She showed them graphs and charts that meant little to Jake but clearly impressed the alien observers. "Human physiology gives you several advantages in rotational combat. Your mass distribution is ideal for controlled spins. Your limb length allows for optimal striking radius. Your neural pathways are already trained for balance during rotation." Commander Zolkith studied the data with growing amazement. "You are suggesting that humans have accidentally developed the optimal zero-gravity combat technique through recreational activities?" "Not accidentally," Dr. Park corrected. "Evolutionarily. Humans who could maintain balance while climbing, running, and navigating complex terrain survived better. Over thousands of years, we developed exactly the neural and physical systems needed for effective rotational combat." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement echoing through the academy. All personnel were to report to the main amphitheater for an emergency assembly. Jake and Amy exchanged worried looks. Emergency assemblies usually meant bad news. The amphitheater was the largest space in the academy, capable of holding thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds. As Jake and Amy found seats, they saw representatives from species they had never encountered before. Some had clearly traveled from distant parts of the galaxy. Specifically for this gathering, Instructor Vexai floated to the center of the amphitheater, but he was not alone. Beside him were several figures that Jake recognized from Academy promotional materials. These were high-ranking military officials from the major galactic powers. "Fellow beings," Vexhai began, "we have witnessed something unprecedented at our academy. A combat technique that challenges everything we thought we knew about zero-gravity warfare." A holographic display appeared above the instructor, showing footage of Jake's fight against Caxthul. The audience watched in silence as the recording played, showing every detail of the spinning technique and its devastating effectiveness. "The human technique, which we are calling Spin and Strike, has proven effective against multiple species," Vexhai continued. "It exploits fundamental weaknesses in conventional multi-limbed combat systems." Admiral Thekvar of the Korvan Defense Fleet stood to address the assembly. The massive, armored figure commanded immediate attention. "The human technique has forced us to reconsider our entire combat doctrine. Our multiple limbs, which we consider decisive advantages, now represent potential vulnerabilities." Jake felt hundreds of alien eyes focusing on him. He had not expected his training experiment to become a galaxy-wide military concern. General Quindos of the Zephyrian Collective spoke next. "Our electromagnetic warfare specialists have been unable to counter the spinning approach. The technique creates targeting problems we had not anticipated." The assembly continued with military leaders from various species, describing how the human technique challenged their established combat methods. Jake began to understand that he had not just won a training match, but had potentially changed the balance of power in galactic warfare. "Human Morrison," called out a voice from the amphitheater. Jake looked up to see a figure he didn't recognize, wearing insignia that marked her as a representative of the Galactic Defense Council. "Will you demonstrate your technique for the assembly?" Jake's stomach dropped. Demonstrating for a few curious aliens was one thing, but performing in front of the galaxy's military leadership was entirely different. However, he knew he had no choice. "Yes, ma'am," Jake replied, his voice carrying clearly through the amphitheater's sound system. The center of the amphitheater cleared, creating a space for combat demonstration. Holographic targets appeared in the air, moving in complex patterns. Designed to challenge any fighter, Jake activated his suit's maneuvering system and pushed off from the floor. In front of thousands of watching aliens, he began to spin. His rotation accelerated as he pulled his arms close to his body, and the amphitheater filled with the sound of amazed murmurs from species who had never seen anything like it. Jake struck target after target as he spun, his movements fluid and precise. He changed direction by shifting his body position, approached from impossible angles, and demonstrated the complete unpredictability that made the technique so effective. When he finished, the amphitheater was completely silent. Then, slowly, beings from across the galaxy began to make sounds of approval in their various languages. The translator systems worked overtime to convert clicks, whistles, and harmonic tones into expressions of amazement. "Remarkable," said the Galactic Defense Council representative. "Human Morrison, your species may have revolutionized combat doctrine across the galaxy." As Jake floated back to his seat, he caught sight of Amy's proud smile and Dr. Park's excited expression. Around them, military leaders from dozens of worlds were already discussing the implications of what they had witnessed. Jake realized that his simple training experiment had become something much larger. He had not just proven that humans could fight in space, but had given his species a place among the galaxy's greatest warriors. 6 months after Jake Morrison's first spinning victory, the Galactic Defense Academy looked completely different. The training facilities that had once been divided by species were now integrated, with aliens from across the galaxy learning modified versions of human rotational techniques. The sound of spinning fighters filled the air in every section. Jake stood in the Academy's new Human Combat Innovation Center, watching a group of young Altarian cadets practice basic spinning maneuvers. Their forearms made the technique much more difficult for them, but they were determined to learn. Nearby, a team of Korvan warriors worked together to develop group spinning formations that could protect their natural pack-fighting instincts while incorporating rotational elements. "Commander Morrison," called out a familiar voice. Jake turned to see Amy Collins approaching, wearing the insignia of a lieutenant commander. She had been promoted to lead the Academy's new interspecies combat training program. Still getting used to the rank, Jake admitted with a smile. His promotion to commander had come with assignment to head the Human Combat Innovation Division, a new department dedicated to finding more ways human characteristics could benefit galactic warfare. Amy joined him at the observation window. The morning reports are impressive. Injury rates in zero-gravity training have dropped by 60% since we started teaching rotational control to all species. Even the ones who can't fully master the spinning technique are benefiting from better spatial awareness? Jake nodded, watching a Zephyrian cadet successfully complete a spinning attack sequence. The crystal being's electromagnetic abilities combined with rotational movement created a dazzling display of light and energy. It's amazing how each species adapts the technique differently. Speaking of adaptation, Amy said, we have visitors from the hegemony arriving this afternoon. They want to observe our training methods. The hegemony was a collective of the galaxy's most advanced species, beings who had previously shown little interest in the combat training of younger civilizations. Their request to visit the Academy had surprised everyone. That afternoon, Jake found himself in the Academy's main conference room facing beings unlike any he had encountered before. The hegemony representatives seemed to be made of pure energy, their forms shifting and changing as they communicated through direct neural interface rather than spoken language. Ambassador Quintal, the hegemony's spokesperson, addressed the assembled Academy leadership through a translation device that converted their energy patterns into words. The human innovation in combat doctrine represents more than military advancement. It demonstrates strategic thinking that transcends physical limitations. Instructor Vex High, now the Academy's Director of Advanced Combat Studies, gestured with his forearms. The spinning technique has revolutionized our understanding of zero-gravity warfare, but its implications extend beyond combat training. Precisely, Ambassador Quintal replied. The human ability to transform perceived weaknesses into tactical advantages suggests cognitive flexibility that could benefit broader galactic security initiatives. Jake felt a familiar nervousness as the conversation turned toward him. Ambassador, we were just trying to find a way to compete with naturally superior fighters. We never intended to change galactic warfare. Intent is irrelevant, the ambassador said, their energy form pulsing with what the translator indicated was amusement. Results are what matter. Your species has demonstrated that innovation can overcome apparent evolutionary disadvantages. Dr. Lisa Park, now head of the Academy's Research Division, presented data on human cognitive patterns. Humans show unusual ability to recognize patterns that others miss, particularly when those patterns challenge conventional thinking. The spinning technique emerged from this cognitive flexibility. Admiral Vekvar of the Corvan Defense Fleet added his perspective. Human strategic advisors are now stationed at military facilities across Corvan space. Their unconventional thinking has improved our tactical planning significantly. Commander Zulkith of the Altarian forces agreed. Humans see solutions that our more specialized thinking misses. They approach problems from directions we would never consider. The meeting continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species describing how human involvement had improved their military capabilities. But Jake was most interested in what the hegemony representative said about the future. We propose expanded human participation in galactic defense planning, Ambassador Quintal announced. Not merely as fighters, but as strategic innovators. Your species' unique perspective could help address challenges that have puzzled the galaxy for millennia. After the meeting, Jake walked through the Academy's corridors with Amy, both of them processing what they had heard. The walls were covered with images from recent graduation ceremonies, showing mixed species teams that would have been impossible before the spinning technique proved that differences could be strengths. Remember when we thought we might end up in communications? Amy asked as they passed a training room where human instructors were teaching rotation basics to a class of mixed aliens. Seems like a lifetime ago, Jake replied. He stopped at a window overlooking the main training arena, where hundreds of beings from across the galaxy practiced combat techniques that combined their natural abilities with human innovations. In the arena, he could see the next generation of galactic warriors. Young beings who had grown up learning that every species had unique strengths, and that the key to success was not trying to be like everyone else, but learning to excel at being yourself. A group of human cadets was demonstrating advanced pinning techniques to a mixed audience of alien trainees. These young humans had grown up knowing they belonged in space combat, that their species had valuable contributions to make to galactic defense. "Jake," Amy said quietly, "look at what we started." Below them, a Corvan cadet was teaching a human trainee how to use multiple weapon systems simultaneously, while the human showed the Corvan how to incorporate spinning elements into pack formations. An Altarian instructor worked with a Zephyrian student to combine electromagnetic abilities with rotational movement. The academy had become exactly what Jake had never dared to dream of, a place where humans were not just accepted, but valued. For their unique contributions, Dr. Park approached them from behind, carrying a communication device. "Jake, you have a priority message from Earth Fleet Command." Jake activated the device and found himself facing Admiral Rodriguez, the same officer who had first shown interest in the spinning technique months ago. "Commander Morrison, congratulations on your continued success. Earth Command has approved the expansion of human combat innovation programs to all our military academies." "Thank you, Admiral," Jake replied. "We're honored to serve." "There's more," Admiral Rodriguez continued. "The Galactic Defense Council has requested human strategic advisors for their deep space exploration missions. They believe human cognitive flexibility could be crucial for dealing with unknown threats." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Humans were no longer trying to prove they belonged among the galactic community. They had become essential to it. That evening, Jake stood alone in the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars. 6 months ago, he had been a failed trainee facing a future in support roles. Now, he was a commander responsible for revolutionizing galactic combat doctrine. Amy joined him at the window. "Thinking deep thoughts? Just wondering what other human weaknesses we haven't figured out how to use yet," Jake replied. Amy smiled. "With the whole galaxy watching us now, I guess we'll find out." Jake nodded, watching ships from dozens of worlds coming and going from the Academy's docking bays. Each one carried beings who had learned that limitations could become strengths. That being different was not the same as being inferior. The spinning technique had started as a desperate attempt to avoid failure. It had become proof that any species, any being, could exceed expectations through determination, creativity, and the courage to try something completely different. Looking out at the infinite expanse of space, Jake realized that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. The galaxy had learned that humans were full of surprises, and Jake suspected that the universe held plenty more opportunities to prove it. In the distance, a ship bearing Earth's insignia docked at the Academy, bringing a new group of human trainees, who would learn that they belonged among the stars. Not despite their limitations, but because of their unique ability to turn those limitations into strengths.